Alright, so in this video, I'm going to be discussing the subway underneath the Twin Towers. What happened to it? How much damage did it sustain? And also some different photos that I found. I've kind of stockpiled a few photos, just random ones, over the past few weeks, considering I haven't done a 9/11 video in a while. But this is the World Trade Center PATH Station, which hosted approximately 25,000 guests daily up until 2001. It did sustain some very minor damage in the 1993 bombing, but it was able to reopen within a week. Now, in terms of the timeline, it closed on 9/11 right after the North Tower was hit at around 8:46. And after the South Tower had been hit, all of the stations were ordered to close due to severe water damage. So water damage underneath the Twin Towers, possibly the sprinkler systems turning on in the train station, causing significant water damage before either of the towers had even fell. So if you're in the train station, you're probably dealing with a bunch of water down there after both of the towers had been hit. All of the emergency systems activating in terms of both of the Twin Towers and the entire complex, and all of the trains had been shut off before either of the towers had fell. Now, when the towers came down, the best way I can categorize the damage, it was, catastrophic damage. The entirety of the subway didn't collapse, but there were areas that did collapse, which obviously made the subway system underneath the Twin Towers completely unsalvageable. You're not fixing it, and it was deemed destroyed. And there's just this crazy photo of them removing the rubble, and you can see them take out the little subway cars. That's just a crazy photo to me. That's the first time I'm seeing that photo, researching this video to do it. There you can see the subway. What a unique perspective this is. This is in the 1960s as the original foundation is being built up of the Twin Towers. The subway right there poking through. That's where it was. So the subway was completely destroyed, or, it wasn't completely destroyed. It wasn't like the entire thing came down, because you would think when a massive building that's around, 110 floors collapses down, anything underneath it would likely cave in. And that's kind of what happened. I mean, the shopping mall was, had areas where it caved in. So did the subway. But it wasn't like a total collapse where there was nothing left of it and it was just rubble on top of rubble. Technically, you could still walk down there. It was very dangerous, obviously, but you could just see the areas in which it collapsed. It's completely pitch black when they went down there originally, right after both of the towers fell. What an eerie sight that is in the subway system. Another thing that I wanted to mention when it comes to, the idea of the underneath buildings surviving, because there's a lot of theories that go around, especially when you research 9/11, and people are like, how is it possible that two giant buildings collapsing wouldn't, collapse the entirety of the underneath structure, the shopping mall, the subway system, the parking garage, all of it? I just think it's very hard to understand perspective of something like this. Like, we could sit here and say, yeah, it's kind of weird that all those buildings underneath didn't totally collapse, but what do we have it to really compare to? Like, what am I going to compare this event to in terms of, well, here everything collapsed, but here... Like, it's just impossible to say for certainty, like, oh, I'm an expert and it's crazy that these buildings underneath the towers didn't collapse with all of that force and all of that concrete coming down on top of them. I just, you can't really compare it to anything. But yeah, I am going to go through a few other different photos. Look at that. That's a gnarly photo. Just all that debris, all those steel beams hanging down with a bunch of concrete. And you can see kind of the subway trains. There's a few of them that they were able to save, and those they did put those on display. Just pretty crazy. There's another photo into the subway system right there, and some of the damage. There's a bunch of water, man. That looks like 3 or 4 feet of water that's backed up there at the bottom there, with just a bunch of rubble, a bunch of concrete, a just massive pile of debris towards the end. And then there's another similar photo of it. And this is just a backlog I had of a few different miscellaneous photos in relation to September 11th, there is George W. Bush. Guess the date of this. I thought it was so interesting. July of 2001. So just kind of a crazy photo with both the towers there in the background. The towers look a little bit smaller. I don't know if it's just a weird scale, but yeah, just a crazy photo with the president and what was coming just 2 months later. So this is a representation of the amount of emergency calls that came in after the North Tower had been hit. And you can see there were several emergency calls from people underneath the plane impact. And then you can see a bunch of emergency calls. This is the North Tower. So there were people calling from the restaurant on the 106th, 107th floor. You can see 51 phone calls from 106. All of those calls above the impact zone, obviously catastrophic for people in the North Tower because there was no way to get down lower. And then for the South Tower, you can just see in terms of the difference at where the buildings were hit, kind of more sporadic, more spread out, a lot more people in the north, higher up in the north because it got hit first. The South Tower, they were able to evacuate, at least a lot of people were able to, but that's just an interesting representation I was able to find on the 9/11 subreddit. This is a screenshot that I took, so it does seem like more and more photos of September 10th are emerging. You can see this one, the military time, 21:31 on September 10th. This would have been a Monday, probably after the rain, because there was rain throughout the day and really mainly in the afternoon on the 10th into the evening, but possibly, this would have been 9:31 Eastern Standard Time at night the day before. So, about 12 hours before the buildings fell. Just crazy, crazy images there. And then this would have been just after they fell. You can see kind of an apocalyptic, kind of tint to the air with just all that rubble and debris and dust kicking up. And you can see 7 World Trade Center right there. Pretty crazy perspective shot of Building 7 after the towers fell. You do have internal fires going on. If I can zoom it in there, you can see the internal fires within the bottom floors of Building 7, which were a result of falling debris. It's a rare angle for sure. And this is a comparison shot. You can see on the left, you do have the Marriott right next to one of the Twin Towers. And on the right, you can see the one little area of the Marriott that was remaining, I guess, kind of next to the Trident skeletons of one of the Twin Towers. This was on the night of September 11th, the sun setting, or at least that's what I was told. You can see the American flag already hanging up there, obviously this being the Pentagon, the location of that. Here's a unique shot of some flooding on the streets of the financial district with all of the rubble, a bunch of those cars with dust on them, a little bit away from where the Twin Towers fell, but you've got all that water there spilled out. Really one of the only shots I've seen of flooding on September 11th. But just in summary, guys, the subway system was... It was unsalvageable, obviously. I mean, technically, it wasn't completely destroyed. It wasn't like the entire thing caved in. Like, you could still access the subway system, but it had parts where the ceiling completely collapsed and it was completely flooded. But yeah, it was unsalvageable. They shut all of the trains off, and initially it suffered significant water damage, and then obviously when the towers collapsed, the sheer force of it, forced concrete kind of fell through the ceilings onto the subway tracks, completely destroying them. Either way, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.